We do? Okay, great. All right, we're going to, 9:05, we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order because we do have a quorum, and Sherry Brown is not able to be with us today, so I'm going to be chairing the meeting, running the meeting. So, welcome, everybody. Any public comment? We have no members of the public with us?
No public comment today.
Nope. Okay, we just need a motion to.
Second?
You want to make?
You need a motion.
I need a
sorry.
motion, sorry.
It would be nice if it was all just in the general fund, yeah, but we do have a lot of money this year. So what I mentioned is, in my email out to the committee, is I was hoping to get some additional information from the state on the ESSER funds and the application process and the timeline, but we haven't received that yet. So this is going to be the same presentation that we gave to the board yesterday. We're going to start with the FEFP because the legislative session did end and they did approve a budget. We're going to look at the statewide impact and then look specifically at what the impact is in Palm Beach County. We continue to face budget challenges. Although we have a significant amount of federal funds that we're receiving, over $500 million, we are going to be facing a shortfall in our general fund based on looking at the declining enrollment, at least as of now. And then we'll give our brief update on the ESSER funds because we do have some additional information that came out of the legislative session. But like I said, still waiting on final information on DOE as to the application process and timeline. So looking at the FEFP that was approved by the legislature, the statewide impact, the base student allocation went up about $53. And that was more aligns with the House proposal from if you recall from the last meeting. The Senate was just keeping it flat, no increase at all on the House, and so this more aligns with the House proposal. There was a reduction in the class size, reduction categorical, and we're trying to find out, exactly what the changes were, but they did change the actual dollar allocation primarily for the elementary school level, which resulted in a reduction in the class size, reduction categorical across the state, not just in Palm Beach County.
Does that actually mean that they can have more kids in a classroom?
No, it's just impacting the funding. So we're receiving less funding, but still have to continue to comply with the class size mandate.
Okay.
The legislature pulled out about $300 million statewide, and the explanation I heard from our lobbyists was they just felt like they were overfunding it. But there was no real solid argument behind that.
Okay.
So with that thing you told us about the scholarships last time, does this mean that for public school children, there'll be even less than a 0.5% increase?
Yes, so the statewide increase in funding is, less than 1%, so 0.5%.
So if you deduct private school from that?
Well, that will depend on how many vouchers, what the actual impact of the vouchers are.
We don't
So
know.
So the voucher proposal that was ultimately approved was more of the House proposal. And so that was just bringing in the Gardner scholarships and keeping the other ones that were funded through the tax credits. Those are still outside of the FEFP. But it depends on, they did expand the students that were eligible for the scholarships, of which ones with FES and Gardner, which ones would be excluded from the state cap that's already in place. So the number of vouchers will increase, but that one was, the actual impact of that one was not calculated. They were able to do, the EDR was able to do an estimate on the Senate proposal, but they weren't able to do an estimate on the House proposal. And there was about $200 million that was set aside at the state level, to address bringing in the Gardner scholarships into the FEFP budget. So as long as it remains within that $200 million, there won't actually be an impact to the FEFP, to our per student funding. They also approved not rolling back the RLE, which that was positive because this is the first time in many years that they're not rolling back the RLE. This is the reserve I was talking about. There was a reserve set aside of $464 million, and that's to address enrollment growth. $200 million of that is specifically earmarked for Gardner. And then the remaining is if the actual enrollment comes in higher than what was projected, they'll utilize that reserve in order to not have a prorated holdback, meaning where they would actually reduce our funding in order to fund the increase in students. This is something that I didn't highlight yesterday with the board, but one of the board members brought out in one of the questions. This was a surprise. We have the requirement of the low 300 schools, and with the low 300 schools, we have to provide an extra hour of reading. I know that's something the committee has talked about in the past. And that requirement was actually eliminated. And that was, it was on the last day of the session. It was something that was just thrown in and hadn't really been discussed before. It was thrown into one of the charter school bills. Just because it is deleted doesn't mean that we're going to eliminate it here in Palm Beach County, but it is something that we just wanted to highlight. We spend about $5 million in order to comply with the low 300 requirement.
So you could keep an extra hour for those students, but maybe make it a richer or different experience?
We could change what the experience looks like. We could change the funding source. It is something that could potentially qualify to be moved now into the federal grant, since it's not something that's a state mandated requirement. And it was recommended when we were discussing this yesterday to really look at, have we seen a benefit? Have we seen that this is actually helping the students to determine whether that's the best use of the funds or whether those funds should be utilized in some other manner to better meet the needs of the students, like you were saying, in some richer format.
How long has it been in place, the mandate?
Oh, gosh, probably close to 5 years, right?
Okay.
At least, yeah.
So you have
Maybe
some
longer.
time to see whether or not it actually helped.
Yes, we have some time, and then especially with last year, it ended up they just kept the same schools.
Right.
So then we can even have some consistency to be able to see, whether those schools have actually improved. Ultimately, the charter school capital outlay was funded because that was something that was different between the two proposals. And so ultimately, what was approved was to fully fund charter school capital outlay. And then the House won out on the debate of having actual legislative mandates on the ESSER 2 funds. The Senate, wanted to leave complete flexibility up to the school districts. The House wanted to restrict and set aside some of those funds. And so ultimately, the House won out on that debate. And so we'll get into that later in the presentation. Okay, so now we're going to look at specifically how this impacts Palm Beach County. And this is, a detail of our FEFP. It shows all the different funding sources of our FEFP that we receive from the state. And normally, when I present this, I just present 2 columns. And so now, after last night with the board, I don't know if I just caused more confusion. But this year, because of the hold harmless, we ended up being funded based on our projected enrollment. And the state never adjusted us. They kept us funded based on our projected enrollment. So that first column there is the second calculation. The second calculation is our projected enrollment for the current FY21 year that we're in right now. So we were funded on 194,600 students. That second column there is the fourth calculation. That's when DOE adjusts based on our actual enrollment in October and February. So our actual enrollment came in at 186,900. And then if you go over to the final conference column, that's the budget that was approved for FY22. So we started this year, we were projected at 194,000. We actually had 186,900. So that was a reduction of 8,000 students. But going into next year, we're projected to have an increase of about 2,600 students. So we're going to go from where we are right now, actual students of 186,900 up to 189,500 students. We already talked about the increase in the BSA, that's line 3. Once you take into consideration our district cost differential, which helps to adjust for cost of living here in Palm Beach County, our increase in the BSA is $60.44. During the legislative session, the FRS rate was also increased, and so the impact of that increase in the FRS is approximately $50 per student. So of that $60, $50 of it is just to address the increase in the FRS rate. And moving down to row 16, because most of the other categoricals pretty much stayed the same, moving down to the proration to available state funds, you see there it's a negative $4.2 million in that column. That's the fourth calculation. That was the adjustment that was made to all the school districts in order to adjust for those school districts that actually had a growth in enrollment from their proposed. What the state did is they allocated whatever that cost was for those schools that actually had, those districts that actually had growth. They allocated the cost of that growth to all the school districts across the state. And so initially, the reduction was estimated to be $1.2 million. It actually came in at $4.2 million. And a lot of that growth was in virtual schools, as well as a virtual school, and I think it was Hendry County? So that was where a lot of the growth was in the students. And so we're not going to have that same reduction, that same proration this year, so that's why that's added back. Then moving down to row 17, the funding compression and hold harmless of $9.3 million. We received, that was a brand new categorical in the current year, and we did not think we were going to receive that categorical again in FY22, and it turns out that we were right, that we're not eligible to receive it again in FY22, so we actually set that up as a one-time, non-recurring revenue item. So now that it's a reduction, it's not something that we have to actually cut because we already planned for it in the current year. And then looking at row 22, the emergency order funding adjustment of $46 million, what that represents is how much more we were funded by being paid based on our projected enrollment of 194,000 students. So we were being, based on the hold harmless, we were being paid on 194,600 students, even though we only had 186,900. And so the dollar value of those 8,000 students equated to $46 million. So the hold harmless is not continuing to the next year, so that's why that is being backed out. And then the impact of the changes that they made in the class size reduction categorical is a reduction of $20.6 million. So now moving on to the local funding, the tax roll is projected to increase by 2.76%. We do think that that's a conservative estimate at this point. But we're going to keep it as is, and it doesn't have where that will impact us. The growth in the ad valorem is in that line 32, the discretionary funds. So if the property values, the certified property values actually come in higher than the 2.76%, we would see an increase in the discretionary funds. We'd also see an increase in our referendum funds as well. But it wouldn't have an impact to the required local effort that we would be collecting. We do expect to see an increase in charter schools, as well as McKay, FES, and Gardner. And once we take all that into consideration, we're looking at a loss in our district funding of $32.3 million. And looking at the per student funding in Palm Beach County, we're looking at a loss of $27.23. If you remember, when we looked at the statewide impact was showing like an increase of $30. Where we have an actual decrease, and a lot of that has to do with the funding compression that we're not going to be receiving, decrease in the categorical as well. So we continue to face budget challenges. This is a difficult environment really to navigate. Looking at the decline in enrollment of 6,000 students, that that equates to, like we showed, nearly $50 million. So we did realign our school staffing based on the projected enrollment, and we got about halfway there. So that's where declining enrollment is difficult in that it's not a one-for-one adjustment, because you're not going to be able to have enough staffing adjustments in order to make up the actual loss in revenue, because all the students are not going to be coming from one school, all in one classroom. They're going to be spread across the school district. We also have that increase in the FRS of $8 million, and FPL is proposing an increase in their rates, and they adjusted their estimate after our last meeting, so it actually went up to $3.7 million if the proposed rate increase would go through, which is almost double what I think I presented at the last meeting. We also have the charter school referendum litigation that's still outstanding, and so we're going to have to set aside $25 million out of the referendum funds to address that, should that actually result in us having to eventually pay out those funds. So in looking at the ESSER funds, we're going to be receiving over $500 million. It is daunting receiving, that much money, because it is one-time money. So we have to be very strategic in how we utilize those funds. The ESSER 1 funds have already been expended, and we've already drawn down all the funds. The only amounts that haven't been drawn down are related to charter schools, that we're still waiting for them to submit some reimbursements.
Yes, I'm sorry, it's back on the page where you talked about the charter school referendum litigation. On the first page, you said that the state was fully funding the charter school capital outlay.
Yes.
So why do they need additional funds from the local?
For the actual local referendum?
Yeah.
Well, because the charter school capital outlay, that's for the capital and to address their capital needs. And so for...
Some of the funds are not capital.
And yet the referendum litigation is all related to the fine arts. So
That's
it's
right.
the fine
Okay.
arts, the teacher supplements, mental health and security.
Sorry, thank you. I was thinking that was capital.
Yeah, but so it's not, part of the sales tax, it's part of the 1 mil referendum.
All right, I was hoping.
I know.
Me too.
Then looking at ESSER 2, there are some state mandates that were just put on those funds, so we'll get into those on the next slide. And then looking at ESSER 3, there are some federal mandates that are being placed on those funds. And looking at ESSER 2, what was approved during the legislative session is that they're going to require us to use $6.1 million of the funding to locate missing students. And so that was an initiative that was discussed in detail yesterday with the board, very concerned with those students who haven't been engaged, or to ensure that those students that did not come back to the school district are still being engaged somewhere. And so this money we have to use at this point, $6.1 million to help to locate those students, provide social emotional supports to those students. It's not limited just to locating them, but it's also providing services as well.
Do we know where all of them are? Or
This
there
is,
some that are just not able to be tracked at this point?
we do, we've been working on this for several months. This issue got a lot of attention by the legislature. And our superintendent, a couple superintendents even, they called a committee meeting and Dr. Fenoy testified. And at the time, we were missing about 88,000 students across the state. So the state earmarked $112 million statewide of our ESSER money to go find these students. And, as Ms. Knuth showed earlier, by the time we got to the fourth, this was kind of early in the session. By the time we got to the fourth calculation, 60,000 of those kids turned up in virtual school. So I don't think the number of truly missing kids was as great as originally feared. So this earmark kind of hurts us in a way, because $6 million is a lot to spend on trying to track down students. And we've done most of that work, and we did it within existing resources. So we have gone through a process. We had narrowed down, at one point we thought we had over 2,000 students that were completely unaccounted for. That list got shrunk to about 1,300. And then we had our Safe Schools Department and their team started tracking the kids down one by one. And we started finding, we kept track. Some students had moved out of the county or out of the country. Others had gone to private schools or virtual ed and home education and things like that. So we have a better assessment now. We had a list of about 5,800 students that we broke down school by school, and we shared with the principals and said, okay, these are students that were supposed to be in your school, or they used to be in your school and they're no longer there. And we did a small allocation of funds to say, if you have someone on your staff that can work evenings or on Saturdays to try to connect with the parents after working hours, let's try to invite them back to your campus. So that work's going on now.
So can any of this money be used to serve those students that
So we were
are
hopeful.
typically lost?
So we don't know for sure yet. The state owes us a webinar with some technical guidance on how these dollars can be used. We were hoping it'd be this week, and it hasn't been scheduled yet. Yesterday I had a conversation with our lobbyist, and his take was that, no, the state's gonna be strict on this, and they want the money spent on those search efforts, to reconnect the students. And if that's the case, I don't think we'll be able to spend $6 million.
I'm thinking particularly of homeless children, that there might be something we could set up in shelters that would keep them engaged so that they don't get lost again.
Yeah, we'll have to push for that. It'd be nice to have some flexibility because there's enough money there that we could do more than just locate the students. We could, try to, as Ms. Canoe said, we'd like to be able to try to provide them some additional services. If we're down 6,000 students, that's potentially $1,000 per student, it's a significant amount.
Some of the homeless outreach organizations could probably also help you identify or find some of the kids, if, they know where they are.
And so another set aside is $30.6 million for addressing the learning loss, and another $7.7 million for technology. And there is a portion that's going to be that the state is directing for use in this current year, FY21, but we haven't received a detail of what that actually would be. But I would assume we'd be able to use it over multiple years as well. And then whatever in the remaining portion, we need to have a detailed spending plan. And so that's where we're waiting on additional guidance from the state as to what really is that detailed spending plan truly going to entail. Is it going to be just very similar to what we already do for our other grants, which is what I assume it will be. And looking at our ESSER 3 allocation, there's a federal mandate that 20% of that funding is spent on the learning loss, and then we just would have to spend the remaining on other ESSER-related initiatives. Because all three of these programs can be utilized for very similar things, really all the same. But then it's just the different set-asides. We have to make sure that we at least target those specific set-asides. And the intention of these funds was really to address the learning loss. So the amounts that are set aside for that purpose, that was how we were intending to spend the majority of the funding anyway, since that was truly the purpose of it.
So in the first one, ESSER 2, it says academic acceleration, unfinished learning. This one says remediate student learning loss. In both cases, it's the same kind of thing.
Well, once we get the guidance, we'll be able to determine. Yeah, we do. I do believe it's the same, but once we get the actual guidance and get more information, because it was very limited what came out of the legislative session as to what they meant by the academic acceleration and unfinished learning. And the same for the locating the unaccounted for students. We received a paragraph on what that actually meant. So we're looking for just more detailed and robust information so that we can then incorporate that into the spending plan that we're preparing and that we're working on.
I always want to think that when you've lost something that you're trying to get more than a year's growth in the next year to,
Yes, there's unfinished learning, you hear learning loss, COVID slide. There's like, probably half dozen different terms to try to address, but the unfinished learning seems to be the most popular and maybe the nicest way to put it, that the students didn't get a chance to get to learning that was, slated for them, and now we need some additional resources to catch up.
So $500 million is a significant amount of funding. Like I said, we have to just be very strategic and thoughtful in the approach that we take and manage that funding cliff that is going to happen in 3 years. So we're working on a multi-year spending plan and breaking it out into broad categories. And, first and foremost, addressing the learning loss, really trying to build capacity within the district so that we get a benefit of these funds ongoing once they actually end. Including, making sure that we address social emotional needs, and when we're looking at this, keeping equity, using that equity lens. We will use it for some infrastructure costs and our ongoing costs that we have just related to increased use in supplies, custodial costs, PPE. We have to make sure that we're transparent. These funds, like all federal funds, will be audited, but these funds more so than others. I'm sure we'll have internal reviews as well as we have our annual external audit. And so we have to be very transparent in our process, making sure there are requirements that we communicate with the public, that they're aware of how these funds will be spent. And so we're working on developing a communication plan as to how we can get the message out there of the funds we're receiving and how they will be utilized.
I think you just said it, but that you're going to make sure this meshes with the strategic plan, is that?
The strategic plan as well as the student academic support plan.
And as you've looked at them so far, is there kind of a natural, as I've looked at it, it seems like there's some natural connection.
Yeah, definitely. And the student academic support plan is going to be a significant component. Well, all of the student academic support plan is going to be funded through the ESSER. We're going through the strategic plan update now in order to come up with this new strategic plan. And so we make sure to, we're working to be included in those discussions as well as using the community input that's coming out of those meetings to make sure that we incorporate that into how we're going to utilize those funds.
The school board had a workshop yesterday on their strategic plan, and there is a lot of coherence and consistency between what, they had over 22,000 or 25,000 responses to a recent survey, including about 6,000 of our students that responded, which was nice.
Wow, that's good.
And there was a clear top 5 list of priorities that came back from those surveys, and one of the top ones was the social emotional work. Safety is still a big concern. But yeah, I think we do need to kind of bring all these things together, and we talked a little bit with the board yesterday as far as the plan to spend these dollars should be tightly aligned to the strategic plan.
Is there a summary of the findings somewhere?
There's a presentation that went to the board yesterday that we could send out to the committee. It just it had basically the results of that survey, and we could email that out to the group.
Could maybe send us a link.
Yep. But really, the importance of this funding, and Ms. Schulstrom, I think you're the only, and Ms. Marcus, I'm not sure if you were on the original committee. The purpose of this committee was when we had the shortfalls and then ended up getting the ERA funds, and just knowing that we are going to have a funding cliff. We're getting $500 million, and we just have to make sure that we don't become dependent on that funding. So that's the daunting task. We know we can spend it, but we need to ensure that it's sustainable, and so that we're really truly building capacity.
And that's a big piece, I think, of the transparency and the reporting, the communication, so that perhaps the population, some things that are really successful become important to the state legislature after these sources dry up, so that they know they need to provide them.
You're being very optimistic.
Which is my
Okay,
nice
sure.
little
Are we talking
hopeful.
about the same
I've always
crew?
got these hopeful things.
No, I think if you spend the money on what happened to the kids because of the COVID stuff, then you shouldn't become reliant on it. You've just made them better, so when we get to regular times, they're self-supportive.
Right, and that's the intention, that this is not, we need to bring them back from, and so that, give them back what they lost, you know. But sometimes it does get difficult. You just have to be careful when you start adding.
Yep.
The,
People.
yeah, and I think this is a great position to be in, but the downside is there is a strong perception in Tallahassee that schools have been taken care of for the next 3 years anyway, that we're awash in federal dollars. So we just got a pretty lean budget from the state this year, and I think that's going to continue for the next couple of years, because they're going to say, hey, they've got all the federal dollars, they don't really need our help. And what the problem with that is, these dollars are supplemental, and they are going to go to addressing, catching the kids back up on grade level, addressing some inequities that even existed before the pandemic. We know that some of the disparities have widened with the learning loss. But that perception that we're awash in money is not going to help the district when it's time to sit down and negotiate for a regular raise for our teachers. We cannot point to the federal dollars for that. So that's kind of my concern, is that on one hand, you got $500 million for the next 3 years. It sounds terrific, and people are going to maybe have a hard time understanding when we're at the bargaining table, and I say, wait a minute, that money is off limits. What we're dealing with is what the state gave us, and that's very limited. And, your pension cost just went up more than the state provided us. So I'm hoping that everyone understands this, but communication's going to be key, because I don't want our teachers to feel like the district's, cheating them. We're just going to have to make sure everyone understands how these different pots of money work and what we're allowed to do.
And that's really because we saw what a shortfall from the state funds there were.
Right.
And this is to compensate in a different way, yeah.
2 separate budgets.
Yep.
And this slide actually gets to that point. So when we left off on the FEFP slides, we started off with a shortfall or loss in revenue of $32 million. I mentioned about the funding compression and hold harmless, how we didn't budget that. We budgeted that as one-time funds. So the fact that we lost that this year, I can reduce that out of the cut. So it brings it down from 32 million to 24 million is the amount of the loss in revenue that we have to deal with. We were able to realign school-based staffing, and based on the projected enrollment. We started doing that in this current year. We got about halfway there, and so we did the rest of it this current year. So we were able to pull out $15 million in staffing. There was no staff that was actually excess. They were all able to be placed through just normal attrition. But that still, you can see, was not even enough to cover the shortfall that we have, which is already less because of the increase in the BSA. So if we didn't take into consideration the increase in the BSA, we got about halfway there just by adjusting our staffing. We had an increase in the FRS rate, and the increase in FPL. So after taking all of that into consideration, our projected shortfall is a little bit higher at $27 million, because our costs are actually more than the savings that we were able to generate through the changes in the staffing allocation. But in looking at that, it's primarily related to the declining enrollment. There's a lot of uncertainty right now with enrollment. This is the first year that we've had declining enrollment in Palm Beach County. And so we're going to continue to monitor, because depending on how enrollment is able to rebound, that will really impact the shortfall that we're looking at. In addition, I talked about the hold harmless and how we were allocated $46 million in funds. We did start making adjustments with departments. We did make reductions in departments in FY21, as well as we started making adjustments and realigning the school budgets. because at that time, we didn't know that there was going to be a hold harmless, so we needed to prepare for potential state cut in revenue. So we are going to have some savings in the current year, but again, those are just one-time savings. So whatever we utilize to cover this shortfall, we have to make sure that we're creating again, a multi-year plan of, what reductions will we have to make to ensure that, again, once the ESSER funds are eliminated as well, is enrollment going to increase enough in order to offset whatever potential shortfall we have that we were utilizing one-time revenue to balance. So we're going to continue to monitor. We're going to bring back a balanced budget, and we're also going to continue to work on the ESSER spending plan. The ESSER spending plan, it's not going to be just a one-time plan that we prepare. It's going to be ongoing. The ESSER funds are allowed to be used over a 3-year time period, and we need to monitor how those funds are being used and ensure that we're getting the most benefit out of those funds. So if we see that a program might not be working and another one is, we need to be able to redirect those to ensure that we're really truly meeting the needs of the students, and then we're not just spending the money to spend the money. So the spending plan is not just a one-time spending plan, but something that we're going to continue to monitor throughout the 3 years of the ESSER program.
So if you're going to continue revising that, will we continue meeting?
We will. I mean,
year or
a
not?
lot of the way that the spending plan, how we're thinking that the plan is going to look, but we need final guidance from DOE as to what the ultimate requirements are. But it will be in the broad categories, and so it would be initiatives within those categories. So if we were to change and add an initiative that wasn't already included in those, then we would definitely
Might be the
want
activities.
to bring back and get the input on any of those types of changes. But we're going to try to keep it where because we know a lot of the priorities and what, based on research works, and those would be the initiatives that they're going to implement. And the ESSER plan is going to align very closely with the student academic support plan, which that is being presented to the board throughout the process as well. And so I think that is my next.
Heather, can I just add something? I think Ms. Knus covered it, but I just want to kind of reiterate, I guess. So this is an unusual year. I mean, normally, if there was not the pandemic and there was no ESSER funds, and we were sitting at $27.5 million short, I'd be working with the committee probably to identify further reductions. But, there's so much uncertainty about the enrollment next year. We're expecting that we could have the largest kindergarten class ever, because there's families that may have had their students stay home another year, and I would hate to make a lot of cuts that leave us shorthanded in August. And we do have the benefit of the ESSER dollars, that some of the costs related to COVID, we fully spent the first round of stimulus dollars and then some. So there is some ability for us to kind of reimburse ourselves and prop up the general fund. The risk is these are one-time dollars, and we also have some savings last year and this year as a result of being at less than full capacity. So we are going to use some of those kind of one-time monies to bridge the gap and see how things kind of turn out in the fall. If we get to the fall and we have an unpleasant surprise and we've decided, we've lost more students, for whatever reason, then I think the situation becomes more dire and we have to say, okay, we've got to start making some additional recurring reductions. But we've got, so we are kind of propped up a little bit with this federal money. We've got some flexibility there, but we're just going to have to really kind of be careful on how we go about this. And we went through this with the Great Recession. We deliberately spent down our reserves a little bit to ease the pain, with hoping that we would come out of it, and eventually we did, and we worked through that. So normally we have a strict rule, you got to match recurring cost to recurring revenue. We might have to push that a little bit to buy us some time to see what really happens with our enrollment. And we've got $6 million to go out and try to recruit our students this summer. So we're going to do everything we can to get our enrollment back.
So this is off the topic a little, but did you see in the report, there were reports yesterday that the birth rate in the United States went down 4%. So 5 years from now, that large kindergarten class may be
Yes,
very
I did.
different.
And, that's our number. We have a demographer that does a really impressive job, but the birth rate is the number one, like, strongest variable he has to predict our enrollment down the line. So you're right. We may, we may pull out of one slump in enrollment and then see another one 4 years down the road. But we'll have to, we do a 5-year enrollment forecast, so I'm sure he's
That's what I was
figuring that
thinking,
out. Yeah. Actually, I think he does a 5 and a 10-year, but we'll see. Definitely 5.
So like I said, the ESSER funds really rely on the Student Academic Support Plan. So Mr. Oswald was here with us at our last meeting. He presented to you right before he presented to the board and at the April 21st meeting. They'll be presenting again in July, either June or July will be the next update. And that will start to get into more of the phase 2 of approach of the Student Academic Support Plan. So what initiatives are going to be put in place at the start of next school year. But I know they're actively working on that plan as we speak. So we have our next, there's a board workshop and budget advisory committee right in the beginning of June. So I think it's June 2nd for the board workshop and June 3rd for the budget advisory committee. And so I'm hopeful that at that meeting we'll be able to go through, show you how we're going to be balancing the budget, how much of reserves we'll be utilizing in order to do that. The tentative budget, and then at that time also the committee would have their report to the board. We would work on that. And then if I have another tentative meeting in June, if we need another meeting in order to finalize that. So our tentative budget adoption is July 28th, and our final budget adoption is a little late this year. It's September 14th. So I don't know if there are any other questions from the committee.
Heather, I have one. With regard to the $500 million in federal money, and understanding that a lot of that money is going to need to be used to correct the COVID and/or summer slide academically, there used to be a rule of thumb today of it would cost about $4 for every 20 teachers. I'm just curious what that number is. I would guess that has been rounded down differently. Like ballpark, was 14 or 15 teachers per million now?
It's about 14 teachers per million, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, the need to hire instructional staff to provide this COVID remediation that we all know that we're facing in August, what does that look like if we look at this year's of teachers that are in their 4th year of drop, assuming they would be extended to the 6th year? Do we have any idea of how many teachers we're looking at losing 3 years from now when the federal money runs out? And are we able to supplement instructional staff now to help with this remediation of the COVID slide to where it's kind of a net zero at the end of the 3rd year? Does that make sense?
Yes, so this is Mr. Bob Hatcher. He's one of our principals. Yep, Mr. Hatcher, we are looking at that because we do have some, we're going to try to leverage natural attrition. We would like to ramp up staffing. I know that plan is still being developed, and we have to be careful not to overstaff. But I know in speaking with Mr. Oswald and Dr. Sheffield, that's one of the programs we'd like to see more teachers so that we could do kind of like small group instruction or, a very small number of kids, more intensive instruction. So that is going to likely be part of our plan. In good times when our enrollment's stable, we normally hire, we've got 13,000 teachers roughly, and we hire about 1,000 per year. That's kind of the normal turnover. So if that is to continue, then we could probably add 500 teachers or so, and safely have a place for them at the end of 3 years. We would not want to staff to the point that we have to have a layoff at the end of the 3 years when the federal monies dry up. So it's a balancing act, and that's some of the work we have to do. Your suggestion about the drop, that's a good one. I need to share that with my HR friends because, yeah, typically teachers can go into drop for 5 years, and but teachers also, if the district needs them, that can be extended. I think up to 3 more years. So that could be a possible strategy, to line that up, right? So you extend some of the teachers, let them help us longer, and then, and then they would be gone when the federal dollars expire. So, good point, and that's the kind of planning that needs to happen between now and July. When the idea is that when we bring a tentative budget to the board, we'd also bring this plan to spend the American Rescue dollars, the ESSER dollars, and we want the board to kind of vote on that independent of the budget. And we felt, it's such a sizable amount of money and significant program that we didn't want it to just get kind of washed up in the normal budget process, but to deliberately have a standalone kind of agenda item so that it's very clear how those dollars are being used. And I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it would seem like if, with a national teacher shortage, if we have the ability to attract and retain new teachers to Palm Beach County, obviously they're going to be a little cheaper, not a whole lot, a little cheaper than the 30-plus year teacher that's in drop. And I'm just very concerned about being able to get back to where we were academically pre-COVID with our traditional funding formula. And I understand that, we have a finite amount of money that is not going to be reoccurring, but how do we get the biggest bang for our buck when it comes to instructional staff and comparing new teacher hire to what we're expecting natural attrition to take place over the next 3 years, even if we only identified our teachers in drop. Now that's not to say that those are the only teachers that will leave the district, but that's going to be a big thing, especially for our elementary schools, looking at one of the biggest 5th grade classes maybe in the history of Palm Beach County. Along with all of the remediation that needs to take place to get past or get back to where we were at pre-COVID. So those are some significant concerns the school-based principals have.
Yeah, that's understood. I think part of this has to be adding more staff, whether it's teachers or academic tutors or whoever we can round up, because what we're seeing, like this current school year, we added some money for tutorial programs, and we added $2 million a couple months ago, and we've only spent 100,000 of it because I think it's been such a tough year on everyone. Both the teachers and the students really don't want to stay after school and work extra. And normally those additional assignments are welcome because it's an opportunity to make a little extra money in a profession where they're not paid enough to begin with. So we're going to have to really be thoughtful that how much do we think we can stretch our existing staff? You're seeing districts around the country. They're either extending their instructional time, adding another 30 minutes to the day, or maybe going deeper into the summer, kind of year-round school thing. So you either add more time or you try to make better use of the time you have and do more intense instruction. And I think the latter is probably the way to go, just based on some of the experience and success we've had with like reading recovery programs, and when you can kind of get that student aside with a teacher that's struggling and really spend some one-on-one time with them. But I am not the academic person here, so we're going to really rely on our academic counterparts and the research to form that plan. And Mr. Hatcher, we'll be sure, principal input is going to be a key component as well, because you guys know better than anybody.
I would assume that you're talking to teachers and principals all the time, because they're in the field. They know what the kids are doing and all that stuff, so I would think it'd be very helpful to shape it from the bottom up.
Yes, I agree.
Yep, and that will be part of the whole student academic support plan.
And some of that has occurred. Ms. Knust and I are not always at that table, but there's plenty of academic meetings going on with various groups. But we'll be sure to get that input.
Thank Thank you. Any other questions from anybody else? So our next meeting is June 3rd,
It is, yep,
Nine o-
June, yep.
9 o'clock here?
Yep.
Okay. If there's nothing else, I guess we can adjourn, and thank you very much for a very good presentation once again, and good luck.
Thank you.
All right,
And I
thank you.
just, yeah, I want to thank the committee. We knew you all were brave when you accepted this assignment to be on the budget committee, but you've really proven it. We've never missed a quorum. And, you know, the district's got about a dozen advisory committees, and I think this one's got the strongest attendance record, so thank you.
Yes, thank
Hey.
you.
Barbara would kill me if I didn't.